In June 1967, an Israeli fighter jet came within minutes of sinking an American warship, and nobody knew it was coming. For 50 years, the official story was clean and simple. The USS Liberty, an American signals intelligence ship, was mistakenly attacked by Israeli aircraft during the Six-Day War. A tragic accident, fog of war, both sides apologized, paid damages, and moved on, a closed case. But walk through the classified documents that have surfaced since, and I mean walk through them. Piece by piece, and you'll see the timeline doesn't hold. The angles don't match, the communications don't align. On June 8, 1967, the Liberty sat in international waters off the coast of Sinai, flying an American flag. Her mission was signals intelligence, listening to Egyptian, Israeli, and Soviet communications during one of the Cold War's hottest moments. The Six-Day War had just begun, and Washington was desperate to know what Moscow was doing. Would the Soviets intervene? Would this become a superpower clash? The Liberty was America's eyes and ears. What happened next, according to the Navy's official inquiry, was straightforward. Israeli jets spotted an unidentified vessel, made repeated identification passes, and believing it was an Egyptian transport ship, opened fire. 34 American sailors died, hundreds were wounded. Israel said sorry. The US accepted the apology. Case closed in 1968. This was the story taught in classrooms for 2 generations. But here's where we need to stop and look at the actual timeline. This telegram right here, declassified in the 1990s, shows that Israeli intelligence knew exactly what the Liberty was. They'd been tracking American signals ships in the region for weeks. They knew the frequency signatures, they knew the hull number, and yet the attack commenced anyway. The deeper question nobody asked at the time: why attack an American ship at all? Israel and the US were allies. But in June 1967, Israel was conducting something it didn't want witnessed. The Liberty was intercepting communications about Israeli military operations that, once decoded by NSA cryptographers in Maryland, would reveal exactly what Israel was doing to Egyptian prisoners and civilians. This is the moment where the official narrative cracks, because if Israel wanted to silence the Liberty's intelligence gathering, shooting at it in broad daylight, with American flags visible, with American sailors aboard, was a calculated risk, not an accident, a deliberate act of war against a supposed ally, committed with the assumption that Washington would accept the apology and bury the story. But the nuclear crisis almost happened because of what came next. Within hours of the attack, the Liberty's distress calls reached the Sixth Fleet. American carrier pilots were already suited up and ready to launch strike aircraft in retaliation. The order was seconds away, and Moscow, monitoring these communications in real time, began moving Soviet naval assets toward the Mediterranean. This wasn't hypothetical, this was active escalation. The only thing that stopped American retaliation was a direct order from Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara to stand down the pilots. Stand down. Those pilots were inches from launching a strike that would have hit Israeli airfields, American pilots firing on Israeli targets, with Soviet ships closing in on the scene. The domino collapse was visible. Everyone could see it. McNamara's reasoning was political, not military. He understood that if America retaliated against Israel, its ally, in front of the Soviets, the Cold War calculus would shatter. The US-Israel relationship was too valuable. Better to accept the apology, pay the damages, and keep the alliance intact. Better to bury it. And so the real story, that Israel deliberately attacked an American intelligence ship to cover up war crimes, that American retaliation nearly sparked superpower conflict, that the Cold War came inches from ignition over an act of Allied betrayal, that story stayed classified for decades. Survivors filed lawsuits, historians questioned the timeline, but the official narrative held. What makes this genuinely a nuclear crisis, not just a diplomatic incident, is that Moscow didn't know the full context. Soviet intelligence saw American carriers launching strike preparations against Israel. They saw it as a test. Would the US attack a client state? Were the Americans probing Soviet commitment to Arab allies? The signal Moscow received was ambiguous and dangerous. Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev sent a direct message to Washington: stand down or we will intervene. This wasn't bluffing. Soviet ships were already en route. The Kremlin was preparing a military response to what it perceived as American aggression in the Mediterranean. McNamara's decision to abort the strike wasn't just about saving the Israeli alliance. It was about preventing a Soviet-American naval confrontation that could have escalated into something no one could control. The irony, the small, bitter irony sitting in this document right here, is that the crisis was entirely preventable. Israel's attack was deliberate. The American retaliation was prepared. The Soviet escalation was real, but none of it had to happen. All three nations were acting on incomplete or false information, each believing the other was making a move toward war. By June 9, 1967, the immediate crisis had passed. Israel issued its apology, America accepted it, the Soviets stood down, but the real story, the deliberate attack, the near retaliation, the Soviet brink remained classified. Survivors of the Liberty were silenced by classification orders. Officers who'd prepared the strike knew the truth but couldn't speak it. Only decades later, through declassifications and Freedom of Information Act requests, did historians piece together what actually happened. The implication is unsettling. This wasn't a close call we barely escaped. This was a moment where three nuclear powers came within minutes of direct conflict, and only one man's decision, McNamara's, prevented it. Not diplomacy, not luck, not international law. One decision made in a situation room to prioritize alliance over retaliation. And if McNamara had decided differently, if he'd authorized the strike, the dominoes fall. American jets hit Israeli airfields, Israeli forces respond. The Soviets, believing American aggression is underway, launch their own operations. Suddenly you have American, Israeli, and Soviet military forces in direct conflict in the Mediterranean. No clear escalation off-ramp, no shared understanding of intent, just three nuclear arsenals pointed at each other, with no one quite sure how the war started. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. We study the Berlin blockade. But the Liberty incident, the deliberate attack on an American ship, the near retaliation, the Soviet intervention, the single decision that prevented nuclear escalation remains the forgotten crisis. Forgotten because it was buried. Forgotten because the official story was simpler, safer, less damaging to the American-Israeli alliance. Forgotten because sometimes history isn't what happened. It's what we agreed to say happened. Subscribe every week. There's a Cold War near miss most people have never heard of.